Step number 11. We've already glued our boards together for our top. Now we need to cut it to size. We're also going to get it the right thickness, cut a little curve in the front, and do a hand router to the top of this. And I want to make sure that you guys, kind of see this process as doing this with any boards that you glue up. So anytime you're gluing boards together, we've always made it a little bit bigger than what we need so we can trim it down later. Part number 1, it says use a glue scraper to scrape off any dried glue off both faces and clamp your board down to the bench when using the glue scraper. If you have wiped up your glue with the wet paper towel before it dried, you usually do not have to do this. But I still want you to look and see if there's any glue on this that you might want to scrape off. And you can definitely see on mine I've got glue all over it. Now, on both faces we want to do this. So oftentimes you wipe the glue off one face but you forgot to wipe it off the other face. So we need to scrape all that glue off. I found it's easiest if you just clamp it down to the bench so it doesn't move on you. Just get it nice and tight. Our glue scrapers, these are found in the tool cabinet. You can find them over there, hang up. You need to put some good pressure on this when you're using the glue scraper. Don't just kind of pull on your board like this. That doesn't do much. Get some aggression out, Get that on there, another hand on top, and really pull hard when you scrape this glue off. And it'll come off. Get some aggression out. Maybe, you're just mad, you just broke up with your girlfriend, you need some aggression out or something like that. Or maybe you're upset that there's freshmen in your class and it's just really, scrape that glue off hard. Sometimes you get little discolorations here with the clamps. You can try to get some of that off. It's going to be difficult to get all of it off, but try to get most of it off, right? Cameraman keeps shaking the camera. It's get that aggression out if you need to. So scrape as much of that glue off as you can with these glue scrapers. If we need to flip your board around, you can, to get the other side. But whatever you need to do, just try to scrape that glue off. We've got to get both faces of this as well. You don't need to get 100% of the glue off your board. Just get most of it off. If we don't get this glue off, when you go to the planer later, that dried glue actually damages the blades on the planer. So you want to get those big chunks of dried glue off. And again, if you take the extra time, which I forgot to, but if you take the extra time to wipe up the wet glue before it dries, you don't have to do this. But it should just scrape right off. Okay, almost done. And don't worry if you're gouging up your board a little bit. That's fine if you get some pieces of your board scraped up a little bit like that. That's fine. Okay, next. It says use the panel saw to trim one end flat. We glued these together. Not every end of the board was perfectly matched up. Sometimes they slip a little bit and slide, or maybe they're different lengths. We're just going to go to the panel saw, like we've already done on your D-ring before, and just trim a little bit off one end all the way down, just to get it nice and flat and smoothed up. So let's head over to the panel saw. Okay, on the panel saw, just a quick reminder, make sure you're cutting off the end grain. Don't cut off the edge. Cut off the part that you can see the rings of the tree. So that's the part we're cutting off. And just a little bit. You don't need to trim off much. We've already done the panel saw before. You should know how to use this. Just lining it up a little bit past where the blade cuts. Hold that nice and tight when you're cutting. Be sure that this panel saw, you take these handles and push them in nice and hard all the way down, and then we'll make our cut here. Pull that away. Cut that off. So now we've just got one end nice and clean and flat. Use the table saw to cut your top to the correct width and length. And you need to know which way is width and which way is length, because oftentimes people mess this up. The width of a board is going from one edge to the other edge. It's the distance between the two edges. And it's going across the grain. That's the width. The length of a board always goes from the end grain to the end grain. That's the length. So we want to make sure that we cut this the correct width and length. So it says the top will be 20 inches wide and 18.5 inches long. It doesn't matter which order you cut those as long as you cut them in the right spot. 20 inches wide. So from here to here is my width. So all I need to do is set my fence on my table saw at 20. Get that nice flat edge up against the fence, and it should already be flat from the jointer earlier. And we're going to cut this to 20 inches wide. Okay, so now we're 20 inches wide. And next it says 18.5 inches long. So lengthwise from end grain to end grain, so we want to rotate it. And we're putting our end that we just cut on the panel saw that's nice and flat against the fence. We're going to set this at 18.5. So again, be sure you're getting the correct width and length of your top here. So now we're cutting this other end grain off over here. Okay. Perfect. So now I've got it 20 inches wide, 18.5 inches long on your top. All right, let's head over to the planer. All right, go ahead. All right, on the planer we want to get it down to 13/16 of an inch thick. We should have left these boards very thick when we glued them together. We didn't send them through the planer yet. And if you notice when you glued them edge to edge, some of your boards might stick up above another one. So you need to take this whole thing through the planer and get it down to 13/16. Measure to see the thickest part of your board, right where you glued those edges together. And right now I'm about 15/16. Maybe one little spot is a hair above 15/16. But figure out how thick your board is so we can know what to set the planer to for the first. So if I am 15/16 inch thick, what should I set my planer to? 14/16, right? We want to take off a 1/16 of an inch at a time. So we're going to go ahead and set my planer to 14/16 here. Okay. Be sure when you're using the planer that you get your board sent through with the grain. This is very important. You don't want to put your board in how it's going to cut across the grain. You want to rotate your board so it's going to cut with the grain, the same way the grain is going. If you don't, if you have your board sent through across the grain, it's going to tear a big chunk off the end of your board almost every time. So be sure it sends through with the grain. Because there's such a wide panel, instead of going a full 1/16 of an inch each time, I actually want you guys just going about a 32nd of an inch at a time, which is going to be half of a turn. Don't go a full turn each time, just a half turn would be plenty. We're going to flip it, get the other face. If it ever gets stuck, remember just push on it with another board. Push your board through if it ever gets stuck. Again, just a half of a turn at a time. I can choose which face I want to send through. Okay, now we're at 13/16 of an inch thick. Let's head over to the Time Saver. Okay, on the Time Saver sander it says sand it down to 3/4 of an inch thick. We've already planed it down to 13/16. Now we should just sand it down to 3/4. You should know how to use the Time Saver sander already. If you forgot, if you need extra help, come find me, I'll help you turn it on again. Remember, we want to get the start button to turn it on, and then we're going to adjust our height to the same thickness as it is now. If I'm 13/16 thick, I can look on my chart. 13/16 is 0.812. So I want to set this to 0.812. Down here I can adjust this fine tuning knob. There we go. 0.812. So that's what we want to start at, however thick you went on the planer. Turn on our feed, turn on our belt. Let that light turn on before you put it on. go with the grain when sanding. Don't sand across the grain. You got to have your board rotated with the grain, please. And again, if it ever gets stuck, if it stops moving, get a board and push on it to get the center to the other side. Hey, remember you want to lower it 1/100th of an inch. So 0.812 to 0.802 will be our next. Over or with the grain. Again, I like to take the board behind and just push on it, make sure that it doesn't stop. Keep it sanding through. Then we want to keep going 1/100th of an inch smaller and stop at 3/4, 0.750. We're going to keep going on this and keep sending it through. Okay, once you've sanded it down to 3/4 of an inch, next it says trace the top curve pattern on the front edge of your top. Instead of leaving this square, I've got a pattern here, and I keep these in the tool cabinet next to the tape measures. You can find them. I got about 3 of them. You just want to trace this curve, and it should only fit on your top one direction here, so it should be able to fit just like that, so we know it's going to be here. If I try to put it this way, it just doesn't line up even on the edges, so it should line up perfectly just one way here. When you're tracing this, get it close to the top edge here, but don't have it way down here when you're tracing it. Get it close to the top and go ahead and hold it tight and just trace that line there. We know what we're cutting off. Then we want to go over to the bandsaw. Use the bandsaw to cut out the top curve pattern. Remember to leave your line when cutting on the bandsaw. This is probably the hardest part, is cutting this without cutting off your line. So I want you guys to really practice on the bandsaw getting this perfect. Come on over. Remember, do not cut off your line. Leave the line. Again, I want to make sure that you leave a little bit of wood between your line and the end of the board. All right. Next, we want to head over to this disc sander or the belt sander and sand it down to the line. We've got the belt sander or the disc sander to use. Okay, just kind of rock it back and forth. Go right down to your line. If there's any bandsaw marks left over after sanding, continue sanding. So you just want to make it so it's nice, smooth edge the whole way with no bandsaw marks. So get all those off. And you went right down to your line. If you accidentally cut off your line or you sanded way too much, you might want to get that pattern again and just retrace your line and then just come back and sand it down to the line again. So as long as you have a nice, clean, smooth edge all the way across. All right, last thing I'm going to show you is the hand router. On our hand router, there's a picture of it on your paper. All we're going to do is do a decorative edge across the edge and end of your top here. This specific hand router, I've put a bit in here that's kind of a curved bit. If you would prefer to have a different style bit, let me know and we can do a different bit for you. I feel like this curved one looks pretty nice and it's pretty good. I keep the hand router in the tool cabinet. They're in the bottom left. There's labeled routers there. There's several of these. but I want to make sure you get the one that has the bit, that's the bigger bit that's curved here. So if you have a question which one it is, just ask me. It says we want to use the hand router to round over the left and right ends and the front edge and leave the back edge flat. And make sure your top is overhanging off the end of the bench and clamp down and then do the end grain first. So on our top here, we've got our front we want to route, we've got our 2 end grains, and then we're going to leave the back flat. End grain first. Don't do the edge first. We want to do the end grain first because it tears out a little bit sometimes. Also, look at your faces and decide which one you want people to see. You want your best looking face up. So, I like that face. That's okay, but maybe it has some knots I don't like. I like that face. I can have that face up. And hang it over to the edge of the bench. I don't want you cutting a cool decorative edge into my bench top. So make sure it hangs over that bench here. You're going to clamp this down. These hand routers are very, very, very easy to use. It's really not that hard. They only take off what they need to, so you're not going to accidentally cut off way too much because it just goes in and then hits right where it needs to and stops. There's a little ball bearing on here that will roll along the edge of your board. So as soon as that ball bearing hits the edge of your board, it stops and you can just roll and glide right along there. Doesn't matter which direction we go. It does, right? We want to go, what, with the direction or opposite the direction it spins? Opposite, right? We want to make sure that your board is going the opposite way the bit is spinning. So just to let you know, we want to push this to the right. I've already figured out which way it spins. So you're going to start on the left, come in, and then go over to the right. Okay? Get close here so you can see what's going on. When you turn it on, don't have the bit touching the board. Have the bit pulled away from the board when you turn it on. And then we're going to come into the board and push it over to the right. Tyler, do we need to clear the sawdust off the screen there? Okay. Now if you notice, there's a little spot that I missed. I came in, but I missed this little spot here. So I'm actually going to go the wrong direction for a little bit. And that's okay if you go the wrong way for a little bit. You'll notice it'll want to pull on you a little bit, so you got to really grip on that router. You just don't want to go the wrong way for the entire time. So just a little bit is fine. We'll turn it on. We're going to go back and hit that little edge there. Just to clean that up, now we've got our whole end grain all routed over. We're going to do the same thing on the other end grain. We'll flip it around, and then we're going to get the top. Tyler, shut it off there. Clean that screen.
Not bad.
So again, get the 2 end grains, get the front edge. If you accidentally do a little bit into the back edge, you can go ahead and route the whole back edge. That's not a problem. Prefer we want to leave it flat, but if you want to use the router and go ahead and do that, it's your table, you can do what you want with it. I want to make sure you get your name on your top. Write it underneath on the bottom, nice and big, maybe in the middle, so we know whose top this is. And then you'll get my signature, it'll be done. Okay? If you need help with that hand router, let me know, we can show you. Go ahead, time is yours.